The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Eugenics and the Bible. Hi, this time I'm actually responding to a specific request that came in email from somebody I've had a few conversations with. And I thought it was a good idea to make this point because, as I pointed out, I often spend time trying to make sure that the atheist community is not arguing inaccurately or dishonestly. I don't want bad arguments on our side, and pointing out that an argument's bad tends to offend some people. Oh, I have this great idea, we should talk about this, and then when you say no, that's a bad idea and here's why, some people get upset. To this person's credit, they did not remotely get upset. They were like, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that type of thing, thanks for the feedback. And I get that. It's one of those things when we're engaged in a disagreement about something, it's frustrating to wake up in a world where you are in a minority position, where it seems like the rest of the world, a good chunk of it, has just lost its mind in some regard. I'm in bizarro world. I don't understand this, and I don't know why people can't see this. But we have to make sure that the criticisms are fair. And there have been times in the past where I've made criticisms that weren't fair. I've tried to correct them when I can. None of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. And a lot of these mistakes are either born out of frustration or maybe just a quick misunderstanding. So I'm going to read the email that came in and my response. So, could you do a topic about eugenics and the Bible? Christians will often claim that the Bible is against eugenics, probably because of go forth and multiply. But if you look at the Old Testament, it's obvious that they don't want certain people breeding, especially those who are guilty of thought crimes. The Bible supports slaughtering neighboring tribes, especially if they worship other gods. Deuteronomy 2, 33, 34, Deuteronomy 3, 3 and 6, Joshua 6:21, he lists some Bible verses. If the neighboring tribes are dead, they obviously cannot reproduce. Eugenics is the practice of only allowing certain people to breed. Extermination is one method of achieving this. It's probably the most brutal, and the Israelites certainly didn't care about actual genetics to develop DNA analysis machines. And so, I pointed out, it's a topic worth addressing, but I don't view it as eugenics, and I think it would be a mistake to paint it that way. Eugenics is about improving the population by limiting access to breeding. It's rooted in the notion that nature, rather than nurture, is the key to improvement. Biblical commands toward genocide weren't about genetics or breeding. They were about views on morality and about eliminating competing ideas. If it were eugenics, they wouldn't have captured the offspring of their enemies. They would have killed them. War and genocide aren't always rooted in eugenics, which didn't exist as a concept in biblical times. There are serious problems to address here. I just don't see that eugenics applies, or that it would be a good idea to suggest that it did. Now, the video that I'm doing here today has to be just a little bit more than that. And it's about how I understand the temptation to do this, to say, oh, well, they went around slaughtering the Midianites and all these others, and that seems to be a lot like eugenics. The problem here is that eugenics is about moving towards a specific goal, as I noted, and the real thing to call out is the barbarity of it, the genocide of it, the problems of saying, go kill all of these people except for the young virgin girls. Kill every man, every woman who's laying with a man, every male child, but keep the virgin women for yourself. Because, of course, the first question that pops up is, how do you know whether or not they're virgins? What is the test for that? Do we just set an age limit and assume? Do we have some kind of medical test? The reason for killing the male offspring has often been given as, well, you know, these young boys will grow up into men, and even if they're slaves, they'll rise up against us to avenge the death of their fathers and stuff. And that may, in fact, be the case. So how about we don't run around killing other people and taking their stuff? That's a real problem. There's a real problem with what the Bible seems to encourage, particularly in Old Testament, attempts at genocide. And you don't have to label it eugenics to make that point. And if you label it eugenics, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot, because now, while the conversation should be about these instructions to slaughter people wholesale, now it's about, what do we call this? What were their motivations? And I've spoken about this before, how unless you can actually demonstrate clearly what the motivation was for an action, it is almost certainly a mistake to make declarations about what that motivation was. Like, oh, they were doing it for this reason. Well, when I say they were doing it because those people believed in different gods and they had different, moral views, this is what the book is basically telling us, that these other people are corrupt. They worship false gods, or they don't worship our one true God that isn't just one God, but the best God. And I have to go with those motivations. If there were passages in there that were about, we need to make sure that we're, purebred, that we keep our line pure, or that we're working towards a better breeding crop, then you could maybe make an argument for eugenics. But we shouldn't, it's like something lawyers will tell you when you take the stand. When you are asked a question, answer the question and answer it as simply as possible, and don't add anything additional. Because everything that you add that's additional is just another distraction that can wind up getting you in trouble. You could wind up saying something that could be interpreted in a way that it completely undermines the thing you're trying to say. It's one of the reasons why I tend to debate based on this notion of I am not convinced that your God exists, rather than debating I'm convinced your God does not exist. There are some God definitions with some people that I'll do that, but I don't think it fits the kind of normative broad use. When you talk about why someone is for or against the death penalty, or why someone is for or against socialized medicine, you may run the risk of, because now we're talking about their internal motivations, which you don't necessarily have access to, you may derail the entire conversation. We could have a productive conversation about this topic, but instead you've made it about something else. You've made it about what's internally in that person's head. And so the genocide is perfectly objectionable. Running around slaughtering people, killing all these people and then keeping the young virgins for yourself, that's enough. You don't have to add eugenics on top of it. And if eugenics isn't accurate, then it can only distract. And I see this all the time. I'm guilty of it as well. People on the Atheist Experience TV show have done it many times. And it's because it's difficult to have a conversation and stay focused on the point. It is one of the many reasons that I am absolutely fine with interrupting people on the show. Because if we haven't defined terms, if something hasn't been said clearly, or if they've made a statement that to me sounds just outlandish, I want to get in there and focus on that right away and narrowly, rather than talking about what somebody's motivations were. It's just generally a mistake. It doesn't mean it was the worst idea. It doesn't even necessarily mean that it was wrong. And if you're in a conversation, I think one of the things he mentioned at the top of the email was that Christians will often claim the Bible is against eugenics. Do they? I'm not sure. I don't know that I've ever had a conversation when I was a Christian or afterwards with a Christian where they said, oh, the Bible is opposed to eugenics. I've not really heard that apologetic. I'd be interested in, exactly how that makes sense as well, because if the notion of genetics isn't there and the notion of pure breeding stock isn't completely there, obviously in an agrarian society you have better breeding stock. The farmers, ranchers, understand that in principle. But then you also have stories about Jacob and Laban, where he's having sheep stare at reeds and stuff in order to breed them with spots, so they clearly didn't understand anything at all about genetics, and I don't think eugenics would fit. But the larger point is, don't let yourself get derailed. Don't think that, hey, I've got this idea that I can make something really bad look even worse by suggesting that, well, that prevents people from breeding, therefore eugenics. If it's already bad, just stick with what's bad. There's no point to go allowing yourself to get derailed into a secondary topic, because you might end up spending all your time talking about that, and then the strength of your actual objection, that a God telling people to run around killing other people because they worship different gods, is already sufficiently repugnant. See you next time. Bye-bye.